I used to think I had it all figured out. You know the feeling, everything in its right place. A steady job, a loving wife, a future that seemed set. I thought I was living the dream. For years I had worked hard, followed the rules, kept my head down. I thought life was simple. You do the right thing, and things stay in place. I didn't question it. Why would I? Everything was going just the way I'd planned. But you learn eventually that life doesn't follow a script. It doesn't care about your plans. I used to believe that if I worked hard enough, everything would just work out. But there's something about that belief that leaves you blind. You get comfortable, think you've got it all under control, and then, in a single moment, everything can fall apart. And you won't even see it coming. For weeks after the breakup, I couldn't escape the war that raged inside me. This constant tug-of-war between the life I had dreamed of and the reality I was now forced to face. I had always believed that if I did everything right, things would fall into place. That life would somehow work itself out if I just put in enough effort. I had this vision of a perfect future, one where everything made sense, where love was uncomplicated, and where my dreams were never interrupted by pain, doubt, or failure. But here I was, caught in a mess of confusion, regret, and self-doubt. And I had no idea how to reconcile these two worlds. In my dreams, things were simple. I was the man who could solve every problem, who had the strength to make the right decisions and steer the course of my life. I pictured a future where Emma and I would have everything we ever wanted, a perfect family, perfect happiness, perfect love. In my head, the narrative was clear. Hard work, perseverance, and sacrifice would lead us to a place where everything was just perfect. But reality wasn't so kind. It wasn't just about working hard or staying positive. Life, love, and relationships didn't follow a simple script, no matter how much I wished they would. It wasn't enough to simply want something. Sometimes you had to be willing to give up the parts of yourself that weren't serving you, the parts that kept you from being honest with the person you loved. There was a moment, a quiet moment, when I stood alone in our living room, staring at the space where she used to be. I could still see the way the light hit the furniture in the mornings, the way the kitchen felt alive with the smell of coffee brewing, the way her laugh echoed through the rooms. I had built this life in my mind, a future that revolved around us. Around her, and it was built on dreams of an ideal version of love. But now, those dreams felt hollow. What was I supposed to do with all the plans we had made, with all the promises I had whispered in her ear, when I realized that they were based on a fantasy of perfection that didn't exist? The truth was, the life I had envisioned with Emma didn't account for the messiness of real love. It didn't account for the misunderstandings, the hurt feelings, the times when we didn't communicate well. It didn't take into consideration that we were both still growing, still figuring out who we were as individuals, as people, not just as a couple. I had built our relationship on a vision of what I wanted it to be, not on the reality of who we were, or the imperfections we both carried. In the silence of those first few weeks apart, I started to see that my dreams were also my escape. I had dreamed of the perfect life, and in doing so, I had created an idealized version of myself and our love that was unattainable. I thought that by keeping everything together, by holding on to my dreams and expectations, I could somehow protect us from the pain of failure. But in trying to control the outcome, I had lost sight of what really mattered, being real with each other. I wasn't perfect, and neither was Emma. No relationship is. And yet, I had been chasing an illusion, a perfect image of what things could be, instead of embracing the beautiful, imperfect reality of who we really were. I thought that if I walked away, I could somehow protect her from the mess I had become. But in reality, all I did was create more distance. In my mind, I saw it as giving her the space to grow, but I hadn't realized that we both needed that space to grow, together. I had separated myself from the very person who could have helped me navigate my own struggles. The truth was, I was scared. I was scared of being vulnerable, of showing her the parts of myself I thought were too broken to share. And in avoiding that, I had hurt both of us. And yet, even as I struggled with all of this, I still longed for the version of us that I had dreamed of. I still wanted that perfect love, that perfect future. But as time passed, I began to see that dreams are just that, dreams. They can be beautiful and inspiring, but they can also be limiting if they keep you from accepting what's real. The perfect life I had envisioned couldn't exist without the messiness of real, lived experiences. Relationships are complicated. People are complicated. And there's beauty in that complexity. The more I fought the reality of my situation, the more I realized that my dreams had to evolve. I couldn't keep holding on to this image of perfection. If I truly wanted to rebuild something with Emma, or anyone, I had to let go of the fantasy and accept the truth. Relationships don't thrive on idealization. They thrive on acceptance, on compromise, and on the willingness to show up even when things aren't perfect. In this struggle between my dreams and reality, I began to understand something crucial. The beauty of life doesn't come from chasing perfection, it comes from embracing the imperfect moments, the challenges, and the ways we grow together, flaws and all. My relationship with Emma wasn't a fairy tale. It wasn't supposed to be. But it could be something real, something raw, and something worth fighting for, not because it was perfect, but because we were willing to face the messiness together. The reality of who we were, who I was, who Emma was, it was more complicated than any dream I had ever had. But in that complexity, there was room for growth, for healing, and eventually for love. Not the perfect love I had once envisioned, but a love that was rooted in the truth of who we were. A love that was real, and so, I began to shift my perspective. Instead of chasing an unattainable dream, I started to focus on what was in front of me, the present. The mistakes, the mess, the growth. I started to let go of the fairy tale and embrace the story we were writing, one chapter at a time. It wasn't easy. It was terrifying. But it was real. I started to get scared. I thought about all the things I could lose, my job, my sense of purpose, my identity, and worst of all, Emma. We had built a life together, and I started to wonder, was I enough? I knew I wasn't perfect, but I thought I could hold it all together. But now, everything seemed like it was falling apart, and I couldn't stop it. I'd been so focused on making everything work that I hadn't stopped to look at what was happening between us. I'd been blind to how the pressure was affecting both of us. How could I be the husband she needed when I couldn't even take care of myself? How could I give her the future we both dreamed of when I didn't even know what tomorrow looked like? The fear of losing her, of losing everything, was overwhelming. What if she looked at me one day and saw that I wasn't who she thought I was? What if she saw me as someone who couldn't keep his promises? Could she even respect me anymore? I could see it now. She didn't want to say it, but there was doubt in her eyes. And that made me question everything. Was she waiting for me to make the hard decision? Was she waiting for me to let her go so she could move on with her life? I was terrified. Terrified that I was already losing her without even realizing it. It's a strange thing, this fear of not being enough. It doesn't just eat at you. It twists everything you thought you knew. The more I thought about it, the more I began to wonder if Emma truly deserved more. I mean, she deserved someone who had his life together. Someone who could offer stability and confidence. She deserved someone who wasn't drowning in doubt and self-pity. But here I was, failing her. Every day, I felt like I was becoming less and less the person I promised to be for her. I kept thinking, what if she's just holding on out of pity? What if she feels trapped? And that's the worst feeling, when you love someone so much, but you're not sure if they feel the same way anymore. When you can't even recognize the person you've become, how can you expect them to? The worst part. I didn't know how to ask her. I didn't know how to open up and admit that I wasn't sure we were headed in the same direction anymore. What if I said the wrong thing? What if I lost her for good? The uncertainty of not knowing what she was thinking, what she really wanted, ate away at me. And so, I kept it all inside, hoping somehow the truth would come to light without me having to face it. I didn't want to hurt Emma. I didn't want to destroy everything we had built. But it felt like it was happening anyway. And as much as I tried to pretend that everything was fine, I couldn't deny the truth any longer. The truth was, I was drowning, and I didn't know how to ask for help. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was going to magically work itself out. I had to make a choice, so I did what I thought was best. I decided to let her go. At least that's how it felt. I told myself that if I stepped back, if I let her go, maybe she'd be able to live the life I couldn't give her. Maybe she could find someone who could offer her the future we had once dreamed of. But in that moment, when the words left my mouth, something shifted. I had always been terrified of losing her, but as soon as I said it out loud, I realized something. I was already losing her by staying. And that was the hardest pill to swallow. I didn't want to let her go, but I didn't know how to hold on either. I could see it in her eyes when I said the words. She didn't respond right away, but I saw the pain in her face, the hurt, the confusion. It was like I had just shattered the world she thought she knew, the world I had promised her. And I couldn't take it back. I couldn't undo it. I thought I was doing the right thing. I thought I was giving her the freedom she deserved. But as the silence stretched on, I realized the hardest part wasn't saying goodbye. It was realizing that saying goodbye didn't solve anything. It didn't make things better. It only made everything worse. I expected her to be angry. I expected tears, frustration, even rage. And for a moment I saw all of that. But then, something happened that I didn't expect. She didn't break down. She didn't lash out. Instead, Emma just sat there. And when she spoke, her words weren't what I thought they'd be. "You think this is what's best?" she asked, her voice soft, but full of pain. I nodded, unsure how to respond. I had made my decision, but in that moment, I wasn't sure if it was the right one. "You think leaving me will solve everything?" she continued, her voice trembling. "You think I'll be better off without you?" I couldn't speak. I had no answers. But Emma wasn't finished. "You're not the only one going through something. You know, I've been struggling too. I don't know why you think I'm not hurting just as much as you are." It hit me like a wave. I'd been so focused on my own pain, my own fears, that I hadn't even considered hers. I had built this whole narrative in my head that I was the one suffering, that I was the one who needed to make a sacrifice. But in reality, Emma was right there beside me, struggling with her own demons. I had been so caught up in my own self-doubt, my own insecurities, that I couldn't see that we were both facing the same battle. I thought I was saving her, but in reality, I was just pushing her away. I tried to stay busy. I filled my days with work, distractions, anything to keep my mind from wandering back to Emma. I thought keeping busy would make it easier, but it didn't. It only made me feel more isolated. The more I tried to avoid the pain, the more it seeped in. It wasn't the loneliness of being by myself that hurt. It was the loneliness of realizing that I had made the choice to be alone. I had chosen to create that distance. And now, it was real. It was my reality. I had this vision of what my life would look like after the breakup. I told myself I'd become the man I always thought I could be, independent, strong, self-sufficient. I told myself that I would get back on my feet. That I would find myself again. But the reality didn't look anything like I had imagined. I wasn't some perfectly put-together man reclaiming his freedom. Instead, I was a man lost in his own head, full of doubt and regret, wondering if I had made a terrible mistake. There were nights when I couldn't sleep. I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about what went wrong. I would replay every conversation, every argument, every moment of silence between Emma and me. And each time, it felt like I was seeing it for the first time. There were things I hadn't heard before, things I had ignored in my desperation to control the situation, to protect myself from facing the truth. The truth was, I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't know how to share the weight of my fears and insecurities with her. I had convinced myself that I had to be the strong one, that I had to be the one who had it all together. But in trying to protect Emma from my own mess, I had only isolated myself and her. I had built walls, pushed her away, and convinced myself that I was doing it for her own good. But now I saw it so clearly. I was doing it for me. For my own comfort. And then came the moments when I would see her, even if just briefly. Our friends would invite us to the same events, and I would spot her across the room. At first, it was hard to even look at her. The ache in my chest was almost unbearable. She looked so different. Not in a bad way, no, she looked strong. She looked happy, like she had found a way to move on without me. I saw her laughing, engaging in conversation with people, and for a second, I felt a pang of jealousy. But there was something else too. I saw a quiet strength in her, a sense of self that I hadn't seen before. She wasn't the same person I had left behind. She had grown, transformed even. And that stung. I wasn't just missing her, I was missing out on the person she was becoming. And that's when it hit me, the consequences of my actions weren't just about losing her. They were about losing the version of myself I had once shared with her. I had thought that walking away would allow me to start fresh. But all it did was pull me deeper into myself, deeper into my own fears and self-doubt. I thought I was saving her from the mess I had become, but in truth, I was only creating a bigger mess for myself. There were days when I wanted to reach out to her, to call her, to apologize. But then I remembered all the reasons I had given myself for walking away, and I didn't know how to fix what I had broken. I wasn't sure if I was the person she needed anymore. Was I even the person I needed to be? I began to realize that this was my struggle. I couldn't blame anyone else for how I felt. The pain I was experiencing wasn't just from losing Emma. It was from facing the fact that I had been running away from myself for so long. I had spent years hiding behind the illusion of control, afraid to face the vulnerability that comes with truly being seen by someone else. I had never let her see the real me, the one with all the flaws, all the doubts, all the broken parts. And now, I was paying the price. But there was something in that pain. Something that began to shift. I realized that if I was going to move forward, whether with her or on my own, I had to face the truth. I had to face the parts of myself I had been hiding from, the parts that I had never shown her. And in doing that, maybe I could find a way to move forward, to start over, and to heal. It wasn't going to be easy. There were still days when the weight of it all felt unbearable, when the loneliness crept in and I questioned everything I had done. But slowly, I began to learn that healing doesn't come from running away from the pain. It comes from sitting with it, from acknowledging it, and from letting it teach you something about who you are and who you want to become. And, as hard as it was to admit, I was beginning to see that maybe the healing I needed wasn't just about fixing what I had broken with Emma. It was about fixing what I had broken inside myself. Only then, when I could truly understand who I was, would I be able to truly understand what it meant to be in a relationship with someone else. I expected Emma to break down, to be angry, or maybe just walk away and never look back. After all, I had just dropped the bombshell that I thought I was doing what was best for both of us. I assumed she'd cry, shout at me for not seeing things sooner. I thought I had it all figured out. But instead, she didn't react how I expected at all. The silence between us was deafening for what felt like an eternity, and I braced myself for the storm. But when she finally spoke, her voice was calm, steady, and full of something I didn't expect. "You think this is what's best?" she asked softly, almost too quietly. It wasn't an accusation, more like a question. She was trying to make sense of herself. "You think walking away is the solution?" I nodded, trying to hold it together though my insides were a mess. I thought it would give you space. Space to figure things out without the pressure. She took a deep breath. And then something in her shifted. It wasn't anger or sadness. It was something deeper, something I hadn't seen coming. Emma looked at me, not with frustration, but with understanding. There was something in her eyes that stopped me cold. A certain clarity that almost knocked the wind out of me. "You think I'm not hurting too, don't you?" Her words hit me like a slap, and for the first time, I felt the weight of everything I had missed. I had been so focused on my own turmoil, my own feelings of inadequacy, that I hadn't noticed how much she had been carrying. I was speechless. The truth was, I had no idea how much Emma had been going through. The stress, the loneliness, the fear of everything falling apart, the way she had been shouldering the emotional weight of our relationship, while I was busy wallowing in my own. In that moment, I saw something in her that I hadn't seen before, not just as my wife, but as her own person. A person who had been fighting battles of her own, ones I had never asked about. And it hit me with a wave of guilt. "I'm not some fragile thing you need to protect," she continued, her voice still steady but firm. "I'm not a damsel in distress. I've been through things too, and I'm figuring it out, just like you." I was floored. I had always seen Emma as my partner, but I had also been blind to how strong she really was. How much strength she had developed without me even realizing it. It was like I had been looking at her through a lens that only showed me what I needed to see, and in doing so, I had missed her growth entirely. "You think that I don't understand what you're going through? That I'm not scared too?" she asked. "I've been just as scared, just as uncertain, but I didn't give up on you. I didn't give up on us. And that's when I realized the truth. I wasn't the only one who had been struggling. I wasn't the only one who had been fighting against fears, insecurities, and doubts. Emma had been carrying her own pain, her own questions about who she was and what she wanted, just as much as I had. She had grown in ways I hadn't given her credit for, in ways I had never even seen. For so long, I had thought that I was the one who needed saving, that I was the one who was lost. But here she was, stronger, more self-assured, and so much more capable than I had given her credit for. The woman sitting in front of me wasn't the same person I had married. She was someone who had transformed, who had found strength and independence in her own way. And in that moment, I knew that I had underestimated her. I had thought I was doing the right thing by walking away, thinking it would give her freedom from me, from the mess I had become. But I realized now that I wasn't the only one who had been holding the weight of everything. Emma had changed too. She had grown into her own person, someone who could stand tall beside me, not because she needed me, but because she wanted to. There was a shift in our conversation after that, one that felt like it lifted the weight of the world off my shoulders. Emma wasn't angry, she wasn't hurt, at least not in the way I had feared. Instead, there was a kind of quiet strength in her that I had never seen before. And it was that strength, her ability to stand firm in her own power, that made me realize I had been wrong all along. I had thought she would need saving, but in truth, she had already saved herself. And in doing so, she had saved me too. "I'm not asking you to be perfect," she said softly, breaking the silence that hung between us. "I just need you to be real. I need you to face your fears like I'm facing mine." I was stunned. I had been so focused on my own shortcomings that I hadn't even noticed how much Emma had grown in the time we'd spent apart. She was no longer the woman who relied on me to make all the decisions or to solve all the problems. She had learned to trust herself, to stand on her own 2 feet. And in that moment, I realized something fundamental. She wasn't just my wife. She was my equal. "You've changed," I whispered. "And I haven't even seen it." Emma smiled. "We both have." I remember the moment so clearly. After all the uncertainty, the mistakes, the pain, it was as if the fog had finally cleared. I thought I understood what it meant to love Emma, to be in a relationship. But it wasn't until I let go of my own fears and expectations that I truly started to understand what love really meant. I had spent so much of my life trying to hold on tightly to the illusion of control. I thought that if I worked hard enough, planned enough, and sacrificed enough, everything would fall into place. But the truth? Control doesn't work in relationships. You can't force someone to stay, and you can't demand that everything be perfect. The more I clung to my own fears, the more I pushed her away without even realizing it. Letting go wasn't about abandoning Emma. It wasn't about giving up on us. It was about letting go of the idea that I had to be perfect. Letting go of the belief that I had to have all the answers. Letting go of the idea that I was the only one who could fix things. In that letting go, I learned something incredible. It wasn't just about me anymore. It was about us. About the space we both needed to grow. There's a certain kind of peace that comes with letting go. It's not the peace of giving up. It's the peace of understanding that you don't have to control everything to make it work. When I finally allowed myself to step back and stop trying to be the person I thought everyone wanted, I started to find my own way back to Emma, not as a savior, but as a partner. We didn't need to fix everything in one conversation or even in a single month. It wasn't about quick solutions or grand gestures. It was about the small steps we each took to understand ourselves and each other again. It was about healing, not just from the outside, but from the inside out. Emma and I both had to face our own insecurities and fears before we could truly rebuild what we had. I thought I was protecting her by pushing her away, by letting go. But what I didn't realize at the time was that by letting go of the fear of losing her, I was actually creating space for us to come back together, not out of necessity, but because we genuinely wanted to. There was no grand, dramatic moment. It wasn't like in the movies where everything suddenly becomes perfect after one big speech. No, it was a slow, quiet understanding that built over time. We learned how to communicate again, how to be there for each other without trying to fix one another. And as we did, I realized how much strength it takes to accept that sometimes the hardest thing is to let go of your fears, your expectations, and even your pride. I had thought that by walking away, I was doing the noble thing, that I was saving her from something. But in truth, I was the one who needed to learn how to let go of my own pride, my own illusions of control, and my fear of failure. And that's when things started to change. When I let go of the fear, I saw the truth. Emma and I weren't perfect, and we didn't have it all figured out, but we were both willing to be real with each other. We were both willing to try again, but this time, with no expectations, just a commitment to being ourselves, together, flaws and all. We spent hours talking in the weeks that followed. Not about what had gone wrong, but about what we wanted moving forward. We had both changed during that time apart, and that was okay. The truth was, I didn't have to fix everything. I just had to be present. I had to listen, really listen, to her fears and dreams, just like she listened to mine. And slowly, something amazing happened. The distance between us began to shrink, not because we had found a quick fix, but because we had both allowed ourselves the grace to just be. We gave each other the space to grow, without forcing it, without fear, without the pressure to save the relationship, but simply to nurture it, to rebuild it from a place of mutual respect and understanding. I realized then that true strength doesn't lie in holding on to what we think we can control. It lies in the courage to let go of what we can't. The courage to trust that, sometimes, what's meant to be will come back to you when you stop forcing it, and that's what happened. Emma and I came back together, not because we had to, but because we wanted to. It wasn't the fairy tale I'd envisioned, but it was real, and it was ours. We were two people who had faced their demons, who had learned to let go of their fears, and who had discovered the power of being honest with each other. Looking back now, I don't regret a single moment of it. Because in the end, I learned that letting go wasn't about giving up. It was about making room for something even better than I had ever imagined.